Hey there, and welcome to LSAT Demon Daily. I'm Erik Johansson, a teacher and tutor with LSAT Demon, and joining me today is Braden, an LSAT Demon student who just crushed the LSAT. Congratulations, Braden, and well done on your victory, and thanks so much for joining today.
Yeah, thanks. No problem, man.
So tell me a little bit about what you did. Maybe just a quick overview of where you started with the test and where it is that you ended up.
Yeah, so I started with a cold diagnostic of 155. And on the September LSAT, I got a 173.
Excellent. So 155 to 173, that is an 18-point increase. About how long did that take you?
8 months. I started in January. I took a month off in May. And my last test was September. So somewhere around 8 months.
Nice. And maybe just a breakdown of like, where did you start studying with LSAT Demon, or did you start somewhere else and migrate to LSAT Demon after a certain point?
Yeah, so I did not start with LSAT Demon. I actually took a course at the local university, which was good. I have no complaints about the course. I just had some disagreements with some of their ideas and their philosophies behind the test. They were really big into diagramming logical reasoning and diagramming reading comp, which always seemed counterintuitive to me.
Yeah, what seemed counterintuitive about that?
Just spending so much time writing things out, right? Especially in reading comp. I always struggled with reading comp. I'm a pretty slow reader. And so I would breeze through these sections so that I could write stuff down about them and not understand what I was reading at all. That just didn't work for me. And I tried it for months. And it just never clicked. I took actually my first LSAT in April. And I took that class in January, and it went till about April. And even after that first test, I would still regularly miss 11 questions on reading comp, 12 questions on reading comp. So that system just never worked for me. I tried, I put in my hours, and it just never clicked.
I think that's a really common experience. Interesting to hear that you felt you had to rush your reading in order to leave time to write notes.
For sure.
So at a certain point, you shifted gears and you realized you needed a new approach to reading comp in particular. When did you find that, and when did things start clicking for you?
So it was after I decided to take the LSAT again. I got my score back and realized I was going to have to take it again. Didn't have another course locally that I could take. So I just started studying by myself, listening to podcasts. And obviously that's when I found LSAT Demon. And just what they said about reading comp made sense to me. Like, it made a lot of sense. They were talking about why are you taking notes about a passage that's 4 paragraphs long? Like, it's right there. Just read it, And so that was when I stopped taking notes on reading comp. And immediately there was like a somewhat decent improvement. It wasn't straight to, perfect scores, but it was, instead of missing 12, I was missing 7, something like that, which is a big difference for me.
Huge.
Yeah. So as I started approaching it more, slowly, just reading the passage instead of cruising through the passage and writing stuff down about it, those improvements started to come. Then there was one podcast I remember specifically, or I don't remember who was saying it, but I think it was Nathan. He was talking about how when he starts a reading comp passage, he has a conversation with the author. Right. And he, there was like the example, I think it was like the purple loosestrife passage, which, I've read probably 3 times. And he's saying that, author 1 starts off and he says, purple loosestrife is a problem. And, you read that first sentence, and what I started doing is I would pause. I would ask questions. Why is it a problem? And I would make predictions. Is it because it's harming native species? Is it because purple loosestrife is poisonous? What are the reasons behind that? And I would read the next sentence and it would say it's harming native species. I would say, okay, great. Why is that a problem? Are these native species important for some reason, or are they important because they're native, right? I started doing that, sometimes pausing after every sentence and thinking it would take a really long time for me to finish a reading comp passage. And it was significantly faster than what I was doing before, just because I would finish the passage and it would take a long time. But then I would just breeze through the questions.
Mm-hmm. That extra time you spend in the passage can pay off in a huge way in just how quickly you understand and can predict the answer to the questions, right? I also, exactly. I love your description of how you have that conversation with the author. To me, that sounds very much like an LR approach to reading, which you already mentioned. You never had too much of a struggle with LR, right? So did you start to feel that way? Like you were treating RC passages a little more like you would treat a passage in LR?
Yeah, I definitely was. I think originally the problem with my reading comp was that I was just so focused on read fast, be done, and then just start working through these questions. And when I slowed down, I could start thinking about the question in the same way that I would think about an LR question. So instead of just trying to recall something vaguely about what I read, I knew what I read. And I could actually apply that to the question that I was trying to answer.
Excellent. How long did this process take? Because it's not simple, or at least it's not easy to just change the way you read. So is this something that took a lot of practice that you had to struggle with? Like, can you say like how long it took before you really felt like you were locked in on RC the way you should be?
Yeah, so I would say it took me about 2 months.
Okay.
Which I felt pretty good about, honestly.
Yeah.
I think my first perfect passage, where I didn't miss anything, was about 2 months after I changed how I was reading the passage itself.
How did that feel, your first perfect passage?
I was so excited, because it felt like, my games were good, games you can get down if you put the time in. And my logical reasoning, I never struggled with. So to get down that last piece of the puzzle felt amazing.
For me, a similar experience was my first perfect logic game section. And I remember being amazed at the time by how it felt, I don't want to say anticlimactic, but it was like unexpected because it didn't feel like I had done anything extraordinary.
Right.
Like it was just like, oh, I just did these games the way that I had been practicing and the way I was supposed to do them. And there's that -0. And on the one hand, I was very excited. On the other hand, it was like, yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I did it right. So I got a good score. Did you have a similar experience on RC?
It was exactly like that. Yeah. Because I was doing it as part of my weekly practice test. And I do this thing that I probably shouldn't, but sometimes I exit out of the test to see how well I'm doing mid-test.
Okay, yeah.
Which is
definitely not
a
recommended.
Waste of time.
Definitely not recommended, but okay, all right.
Yeah, I would do that. I shouldn't do that. Don't do that. But I did. And so I was measuring my progress. RC was last. And I knew like, okay, if I miss, no more than 4, then I'll get something like a 174 or something like that. Which is... I put way too much thought into the actual score and not enough into taking the test, but it is what it is.
Very common.
So, yeah, I finished the test and I get my score back and it's 177. And I was like, I was not expecting that. Like, what is that? And it was because I had just 100%ed the reading comp section, which I didn't expect to do. I had never done that. I think my best sections before that were I would miss 3 or something like that. And so to have that happen, doing exactly what I've been practicing for the last 2 months, It just felt like it was anticlimactic, but it was also exciting to know that I was done. Yeah, I wasn't done, but I was ready, you know?
Yep, I totally get that. Excellent. Shifting gears a little bit, I want to maybe talk about what your study routine was like. Now, you were working full time while studying, right? Maybe talk a little about how you found that balance, because it's something that a lot of students struggle with.
Yeah, so I worked full time as a paralegal,
Which is many I think would call a more than full time job, right?
Sometimes, yeah. I feel like my work specifically is they try to make it as lenient or laid back as possible, but it's 40 hours a week, hands every week, no less. But my schedule was more predictable than I think a lot of paralegals' schedules are. So I knew I would get into the office at 8 and I would leave at 4. And so initially what I would do is I would work just the full day. I would go to the gym to kind of get my mind going, get pumped up a little bit. And then I would go to the library and study for a couple hours, which, was fine. But what worked better for me is later on, I started to just go straight into studying right after I got off work. And I would do about a 3-hour block.
Wow.
It's a little longer. Yeah. I've never felt like I'm the most, naturally intelligent guy, but I've always felt like I can just grind. And so that was kind of my philosophy on it.
That is a huge part of this test, and I think of legal work, right? It's just the ability and the willingness to put in the hours and figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. But there are smarter ways to do that. Before my first test, I did it really poorly. I was really dumb. But what I did, because I registered late, so I got a really bad time slot. So I was taking the test at 6 a.m.
Yikes.
And so I wanted to acclimate to that, but I started work at 8. So I would wake up at 4 every day, and then I would go for a short run just to get pumped up. And then I would take a full LSAT and not review it at all. So
yeah,
I basically wasted my time for 3 weeks, is how I look at it. But I feel like if you just are smart about working hard, then you can get the best of both worlds, where you're working hard and getting the benefit from that, but also you're not wasting your time.
Yeah. So tell me how you would do it differently. When you say, if you're smart about working hard, what would that look like to you?
So for me personally, I noticed that I could study for about an hour and a half before I started getting a little groggy, a little tired, not focusing as well as I should. So what I would do is, as soon as I finished work, I would just sit in my cubicle. It's quiet there. And I would just start working through sections. I would start drilling, something like that. And I would do that for about an hour and a half. Then I would get up, walk around, use the bathroom, get a snack. And then I would start, because I went to the gym right after I studied, I would drink a lot of caffeine, just to get myself pumped up. And that got me through the second hour and a half of my study every time. I would actually feel like the second hour and a half was more productive than the first hour and a half, because I was just so pumped up. And so I felt like a genuinely solid 3 hours of study every day after work.
That's great. And I think the key thing that listeners should take away from that is that you realized what your limits were for a single session and when you needed to take a break, and you kind of trusted your feelings on that and didn't try to push beyond what would have been productive. I'm sure we have all, who have studied for the LSAT, been on those marathon study sessions where you try to just grind out hours and hours, and at a certain point you're just not focused, you're not productive, and you're sacrificing on thorough review, and you're really just kind of grinding through to see that you keep getting questions right, or try to get the next one right to prove something to yourself. At least that was my experience. So yeah, many people who work full time, who are studying, find they are most productive to study in the morning, like I did. But you found something else that worked for you, and you were just kind of honest about your energy levels and your feelings, and you found something that worked best with your schedule. That's great.
Yeah. And I genuinely think that maybe it would have been more productive for me to study in the morning. But of course, had to be at work at 8. So,
Yep.
I just found something that worked for my specific schedule, and I feel like it worked out pretty well.
So talk to me about the experience of your official test day that led to your 173. Presumably you weren't stuck with a 6 a.m. slot anymore, and you had a little more, you were a little more comfortable with the whole day.
Yeah. So I had actually taken the August LSAT as well, and it went horribly with all the proctor issues and everything. And I actually had to retake it a week later. And so after that, I was only in person. That was my philosophy then, which I feel like genuinely helped. My in-person experience was very good. So that day I actually got the 173, felt great, caffeinated, how I like to be when I'm doing LSAT stuff, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And I went in for the test around 10, and everything felt great, except for that second section of logical reasoning. Mm-hmm. For whatever reason, just was brutal. It was the hardest section I think I've ever taken. Mm. And so I got to the end of it, and I was like, well, I guess I just need to hope that was the experimental section. And so I just went into the next 2 sections under the idea that was an experimental section. It didn't count. And these 2 sections are worth something, mm-hmm. which maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But ultimately, I felt really good about the other 3 sections.
Yeah.
I felt arguably even better than I actually did. I had this every single time I took the LSAT, I underperformed what my median score was in my previous tests. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I feel like 3 times shows that that's probably just how I perform on test day, is just a little worse than I perform on practice tests.
Well, that's not unusual. And I was going to ask, did you have any inclination to take the test again? Because you said you've scored as high, at least as a 177 on a practice test. Did you have any thought of taking it again, reaching for a higher score? Or did you know that, hey, 173 is well above the median at the school where I would really like to go, and I'm ready to get an application in?
Yeah, that was kind of my thoughts on it. Sure. Of course, part of me thought maybe I should push for something higher. Obviously, I would have the earliest I could register would be for November. That would push me back another year, which isn't the end of the world, of course. It's not a bad idea to take some time and improve your score. But where I was trying to go at 173 is more than enough. Right. Nice.
I suspect you'll be in good shape. So yeah, do keep us posted. Do keep us posted on that. You said that you thought that the in-person testing experience was good for you. That's something that we get a lot of questions about now because it's a new option. We're not all stuck taking the test from home. I personally was really thankful I was able to take the test from home, but I have a quiet, controlled environment that I have just good control over. Yeah, tell me just maybe briefly about that experience and why it worked well for you as opposed to taking the test at home.
Yeah, so I felt like in person made it a lot simpler. I mean, in person made it a lot simpler than remote was. Because I didn't have to make sure my environment was controlled. I live in an apartment right next to the road, so there's cars passing all the time. The in-person testing center where I go was really nice, actually.
Nice.
And they had little headphones for noise cancellation that you could wear while you were taking the test.
Great.
So all you had to do was show up. You didn't have to cover any pictures in your background or wait for a proctor or anything. So I genuinely really enjoyed the in-person experience. I also felt kind of more pumped up, I don't know, when I went, which is it's probably just a me thing. Maybe some other people will feel that way, but
felt like
something about driving there. Yeah, it felt like game day. Exactly.
Cool. And I mean, just with the seamless with the computer and the software that they had, you didn't have a proctor poking around your screen while you're doing it. Cubicle, there wasn't any noise to worry about. So you were able to just lock in and not be distracted by the environment at all.
Exactly. There was just a lot less worried about. A lot less to worry about.
Great.
So if I don't know, if someone has a lot of anxiety about, their software working right and getting their environment ready, I think if you have the option to test in person, that's not a bad option to take.
Nice. Well, best of luck to you. You set yourself up for success with that 173, and sounds like you have a good idea of what you're looking for and where you want to go. So congratulations again, and well done on all the hard work that got you there. That was really, you leaning into what you understood, was intuitive about reading comp on this test, and then just being willing to put in the consistent hours to get it done. So yeah, hats off to you. Well done, my man.
Thanks.
You've been very generous with your time and shared some great advice about RC in particular. Any last words of wisdom that you want to share with students currently on the grind?
I would say try different methods and find what worked for you. I feel like for me, taking it slowly, understanding every sentence worked really well, and it will probably work really well for you. But I also know people who wrote things out and that worked really well for them. I would just say try things, watch your scores, see what happens. And if one thing's clearly better than everything else, stick with it.
Cool. Well, thanks again, Braden. Wonderful getting to talk with you today, and keep us posted on your application cycle. Definitely want to hear about your further success when you end up going to law school for cheap or ideally for free.
Yeah, right. Yeah, thanks, man.
All right. Well, email daily@lsatdemon.com if you'd like to ask us a question or share some LSAT or law school admissions news. Thanks for listening, and thanks again, Braden, for coming on.